Hi there, I'm John Lebensold, and today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking at creating the add to cart page of our shopping cart. If you've been following along, this is currently what our site looks like. It's got 3 products that it's pulling in from an XML file, and we've got these add to cart links. Hold on, I'm just going to view, show status bar. You'll see, but they're not really going anywhere right now. In fact, nothing really goes anywhere right now. So I'm going to create a shopping cart object in PHP where we're going to be storing the quantity of each item that we add to our cart. And I'm also going to be creating the add to cart page. So let's take a look briefly at our catalog.xml file. If you noticed, we have these ID tags that we haven't really used in our template yet. And I think we're going to start using them as a way of uniquely identifying. We don't need 01 here. We'll just call this cumin. We need a way of uniquely identifying each product. And this way, when somebody buys our products and they see an invoice, this is what we want them to see. And this is what gets sent back to us when we have to deal with the payment and the shipping of whatever product that just got purchased. So I'm going to start by going back to our templates.php file. And instead of this hyperlink going nowhere, I'm going to go to add to cart.php, and then I'm going to set it up so that the ID here corresponds to product ID. I'm just going to refresh that, and you'll see now at the bottom here that ID equals tomato soup, ID equals pasta, and ID equals cumin. So we're already on the right track. Now let's create the add to cart page, which doesn't exist quite yet. I'm just going to create a new PHP file, call it add to cart. Now luckily we don't really have to start from scratch. We can require once. Let's make sure we have all those functions. We'll just go to functions.php, and then we'll close that. And I'm going to use this other kind of PHP tag, which is the PHP tag, the short tag, plus the equal sign, which automatically means echo. I'm just going to say render header. I'm going to refresh that, and if I hit add to cart, you'll notice that we've basically got the header of our file already. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do render footer. So we've got ourselves a clean page to start with. And if we change anything in our template, that template or that change will be reflected everywhere. So the next thing we need to do is we need to create a shopping cart. This shopping cart is going to hold the quantities and the items that a particular person has added while they were on the page. Now we're going to be using session to store that information on the server and make sure that the shopping cart doesn't disappear between one page request and another. So let's start by just creating the shopping cart itself. I'm going to start by, in the classes folder here, creating a new PHP file. And this PHP file is going to be called shopping cart. Now, if I look at this class, if I'm thinking of my shopping cart object, I'm just going to open this up, and I'm going to create a variable for items. Now, I'm not exactly sure what those details look like, but I know I'm going to have a private variable called items, and it's going to be an array. It's just going to be a collection of items. And aside from that, I'm not really sure what else I want right now. So I'm just going to make sure that the rest of the program can figure out where the shopping cart file is, just by adding another reference here. So it's under classes, shopping cart.php. Now let's go to add to cart. First thing I want to do is I want to be able to get a shopping cart object. So what does that look like? Well, I'm not really sure how or what the rules are for getting a shopping cart, but it would probably look something like this. First, we would check to see if a shopping cart already exists in session. So I'm going to start by saying, is there a cart in session? Now, this not sign basically means that whatever this is, if isSetSessionCart is true, then we would be doing something. But if this isn't true, which is the case right now, we want our shopping cart to equal a new shopping cart. Now, if it's not true, or if it is true, rather, then we want to get it from session. Now, this looks good so far, except I'm also going to use something called serialization. If you think about how a zip file can take something and zip it all up and make it really small, serializing and unserializing is a way of PHP to take objects and make them all compact and easily managed during their stay either in a database or in session, which is in memory on the PHP server. So I'm going to unserialize the session. And inside session, there's a variable called cart. Now, this might seem a little weird at first, but hopefully we'll be able to clear this up in a minute. So basically, I'm going to turn this into a function. And this function is going to get shopping cart. And I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to put it in here, and I'm going to either return an unserialized existing shopping cart, or I'm going to return a new shopping cart. Now you'll notice I've skipped on putting in more squiggly brackets here because they're actually not necessary. If you've only got one thing that you're checking in your if statement, then you can get away with just doing if and then the return value and else and the return value. And this way, it keeps it relatively clean. And then here I can go shopping cart equals get shopping cart. So what is this session business? Well, just like if I go back to the page which we're currently working on, and I've got an ID here, if I want to access that ID in PHP, it's just a matter of going _get and then ID, and then I'll get whatever variable has been passed in over here. If you've done any work with forms, you know that you could also just grab some data by using post. And it would be, if it was posted back to the server, then you'd be able to pick it up that way, or also via request, and that's get and post combined. Now, session variables work a little differently. Session variables are stored on the server itself, and they're handled for you transparently. And what happens is on the client's browser, a cookie is stored, which references the data that's being kept in memory on the PHP server. So I'm going to take this get shopping cart method, and I'm going to put it in my functions file. Now we have our shopping cart object. The next step is to check to see if we've got a product ID that we need to handle. And if we do, then we want to add the ID, or we want to add the item to the shopping cart. So I'm going to create a new block of PHP here, and I'm going to say that the product ID is equal to request ID. Now, if I just echo that product ID, you'll see that tomato soup appears right here. And it actually appears in between the header and the footer. So now that we have our product ID, we should check to see if the product exists. So I would like to write some code that looks like this. If product exists, product ID, then shopping cart, add item, product ID, right? Now, of course, this isn't going to work yet because product exists is not a PHP function, and our object doesn't have an add item function. So let's start with product exists. And for now, we'll just comment this out and we'll say echo product exists. I'm just going to save that over there, and we'll go back to our functions file. And we're going to create a new function, and this function is going to be called product exists. And it takes in a product ID. And we're going to actually do something very similar to what we did in our templates file when we wanted to create our catalog. We're going to use for each getXML catalog as product. It's the same idea, except this time we're going to be returning true or false. So here I'm going to do for each getXML catalog as product, and I'm just going to say if product ID is equal to the product ID. That's a little confusing. I'll explain that in a minute. Return true, and then we're going to just put return false down here. So what this is doing is it's basically saying, I want to compare whatever you're giving me, whatever you're sending me, to whatever's in the XML catalog. And I'm going to see, okay, well, if I've got this ID, and this ID is equal to the same thing as the product ID, then you're going to tell me that the product exists. So we're going to return true. Now, if after going through every single item in the XML catalog, we haven't found a condition like this, then you're going to return false. So if I go back to my page now, we're going to see that tomato soup exists. But if I put in a whole bunch of junk here, I'm not going to get anything. So we know that's working. The next step is to add some logic to our shopping cart. So I'm going to create a function called add item. Now, in our shopping cart, add item is going to be a public function. It's going to be called add item, and it's going to take in the product ID. And we're going to check. We're going to have to do some checking again. So if array key exists, product ID in this items, then we want to go to this items product ID, and we want to say that it's this items product ID plus 1. Else, we want to say this items product ID equals 1. Okay. Oh, forgot a semicolon there. Now, I'm going to explain this for a second. If we've got this items array here, it's basically a collection. Now, we could do something like items tomato soup, and then I could say equals 1. And I could keep going down, and I could have cumin equals 3, and I could have pasta equals 2. So what this would tell me is this is essentially a data structure where tomato soup corresponds to 1, which means I've got 1 can of tomato soup, I've got 3 orders of cumin, and I've got 2 orders of pasta. What we're doing here is we're actually doing the same thing. Add item product ID is taking the product ID, and first it's checking to see if in this items, which is this items over here, we've already got that product ID. And if we do, then we want the value to be this item's product ID, which is the value, the current quantity, plus 1. Now, if it doesn't exist in this collection already, then we want to set it to 1, and we want to have that product ID in the item collection. And that's basically all add item is doing. Now, it's kind of useless to have all of our items in here if we can't get them. So we can just add items to our shopping cart object, but we can't actually get them out quite yet. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to say public function. I'm going to say get items, and it's going to return all the array keys in this items. And So now we've got this shopping cart object. Let's say we trip this up and we decide, you know what, we're going to do 3 times add item, add item, add item. And then here, I'm really curious, so I'm going to do another PHP tag. I'm going to do a var dump, which basically dumps whatever's in the variable. And I'm going to do shopping cart, and I'm going to say get items, the semicolon. We'll see that basically we're not getting anything. But if I go here and I get rid of all this business and we just say ID equals tomato soup, then I'm going to see that we actually have tomato soup in our cart. And if I put in pasta, we'll have pasta in our cart, and so on and so forth. So in the next video, we're going to go and we're going to finish this whole session business. We can get the shopping cart from session, but we haven't set the shopping cart in session. And we're going to finish fleshing out our shopping cart object.